The humid August darkness wrapped around the highway like a curse that would not lift. Rain hammered down in sheets, turning the asphalt into a mirror of the dying sky, and Rowan Cole sat motionless in her ancient sedan with both hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles had turned white. The engine had died 15 minutes ago. The dashboard lights flickered once, twice, then surrendered to black. She was 27 years old but looked decades older, her dark hair plastered to her neck, her waitress uniform still damp from the evening shift, and the trembling that started in her hands had spread through her entire body like a fever she could not control. $78. That was all the money she had left in the world. $78 to her name, and it had to last until her next paycheck, which was still 8 days away. The New York summer heat hung in the air even with the rain, thick enough to taste, and her breath fogged the windshield as she stared out at the empty highway stretching in both directions like a road that led nowhere at all. Then headlights appeared through the deluge. Not one set of headlights. 5. The vehicles emerged from the darkness like predators hunting, black SUVs with tinted windows moving in perfect formation, their engines rumbling with the sound of something dangerous being awakened. The convoy slowed as it approached her disabled sedan. The lead vehicle stopped directly behind her? For a moment, Rowan heard only the rain and the idle engines and her own heart trying to claw its way out of her chest. Then the rear door of the first SUV opened. A man stepped out into the downpour without hesitation, without reaching for an umbrella, as if the rain itself would not dare to touch him. He was tall, easily 6'1", with shoulders that seemed to stretch the seams of his tailored black suit, the kind of suit that cost more than 3 months of her salary. His dark hair was slicked back from his face, revealing sharp cheekbones and an intensity in his dark eyes that made the world seem smaller, colder, more dangerous. The scar that cut through his left eyebrow caught the distant flash of lightning. Dante Ferraro did not ask permission before approaching her vehicle. He simply moved with the kind of certainty that suggested the world had been arranged specifically for his convenience. When he reached her window, she rolled it down with shaking hands, and the first thing she noticed was his watch, a gold Patek Philippe that probably cost more than her entire car, more than everything she owned in the world combined. "Your vehicle is disabled," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, with no inflection, no emotion, just a statement of fact. "How long have you been sitting here?" 15 minutes, Rowan whispered. Her voice trembled like a candle in the wind. "I don't know what's wrong with it. It just died." Behind him, 2 men emerged from the lead SUV. One was tall and broad-chested with a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. The other was leaner, darker, with eyes that never stopped moving, cataloguing every detail of the scene, every possible threat. Carlo and Pietro. She didn't know their names yet, but she would come to know them. She would come to know that they had been with Dante Ferraro for nearly 15 years, that they had watched him build an empire on blood and vengeance, that they had never seen him do what he was about to do. "Where were you headed?" Dante asked. "Home. The Covington estate. I work there. I'm a nanny. I live there, actually." In the converted closet off the 3rd-floor hallway. She didn't know why she was telling him this. The words spilled out of her like water through a broken dam, like her body understood on some cellular level that this man was not someone who could be lied to. "My shift ended at 9. I was trying to get home before." "Before what?" "Before I run out of gas. There's still a quarter tank, but my transmission sounds like it's grinding. I thought I could make it home, and then tomorrow I could figure out." She stopped. She clamped her mouth shut. He did not need to hear about her problems. He did not need to know about the foreclosure notice she'd received 3 weeks ago, or the fact that she had exactly $78 to her name, or that the children she raised like they were her own would never actually be hers. Dante's dark eyes held hers for a long moment. Then he turned to Carlo. "Call Sal's towing service. Tell him it's for me. I don't care if he's sleeping. I don't care what he's doing. Get a tow truck here in the next 10 minutes and have them take the vehicle to Romano's shop on Mulberry Street. Repairs are my responsibility." "Yes, sir," Carlo said, already pulling out his phone. No, Rowan said immediately. The word shot out of her like a bullet. No, I can't afford. It is not your decision, Dante said, and there was something in his voice that made it clear the matter was closed, sealed, finished. You need to be at the Covington estate. Yes? She nodded. Then you will ride with me. We will drop you on our way back to the city. Pietro, secure her vehicle. He turned and walked back toward the lead SUV without waiting for her response, without asking if she was comfortable, without any of the small courtesies that made other people seem human. Just the absolute certainty that she would comply, that his words carried the weight of law, of gravity, of something immovable. Rowan grabbed her bag from the passenger seat and stepped out into the rain. The deluge soaked through her already damp uniform, and she clutched the leather shoulder bag like it was a life preserver. Pietro was already examining her sedan, his movements efficient and practiced, the movements of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The rear door of the SUV was open, waiting for her. Dante was already inside, sitting in the back seat with a dark leather briefcase open across his lap, papers illuminated by the reading light above his head. She climbed in carefully, acutely aware of how out of place she was in this vehicle that probably cost more than the house she had lived in 5 years ago. The leather smelled like expensive cologne and something else, something metallic and cold that she couldn't identify. Where is the Covington estate? He asked without looking up from his papers. Westchester, she said quietly. The address is 47, Blackwood Drive. It's about 40 minutes north. He made a note on a document with a pen that looked like it was made of silver. They treat you well? Your employers? The question hung in the air between them like something with weight and dimension. She thought about Evelyn Blackwell, the woman who employed her, the woman who treated her like she was furniture, like she was nothing, like she was less than human. She thought about the 14-hour days, the converted closet she slept in, the fact that she was never allowed to eat in the dining room, the way Evelyn's friends looked through her as if she was invisible. They're fine, Rowan lied. The car pulled away from the highway, moving forward into the darkness, the rain drumming against the roof like fingers demanding entry. Dante finally looked up from his papers. His dark eye studied her with an intensity that felt like a blade cutting through the air between them. You are lying. Your jaw tightens when you lie. You glance down and to the left. It is a tell. I'm not. Yes, you are. And that is acceptable. Everyone lies about things that hurt them. But you should know that I can always tell. He returned his attention to his papers. Your child? No. I'm a nanny. The children aren't mine. But you love them. It wasn't a question. She nodded anyway. How much do you earn monthly? $2,000. Plus room and board. She heard him make another note. The sound of the pen on paper was methodical, measured, precise. The sound of someone recording something important. The remainder of the drive passed in silence. Rowan stared out the window at the New York darkness, at the city sprawling out before them like a beast with 1,000 eyes, all of them watching, all of them judging. Her heart had finally stopped racing, but it hadn't stopped beating hard enough to hurt. She had been in the presence of Dante Ferraro, the man whose name people whispered in dark corners, whose name was followed by stories of violence and vengeance, whose presence alone could make grown men fold into themselves like paper. When the SUV finally turned onto Blackwood Drive, when the massive iron gates of the Covington estate came into view, Dante reached into his briefcase and withdrew a business card. The cardstock felt expensive in her fingers, heavy, real, the kind of card that belonged to someone important. If you ever need assistance, he said quietly, anything at all, you call this number. You do not call anyone else. You do not ask permission. You call this number. Do you understand? Rowan looked at the card. The letters were embossed in gold. Just a name and a phone number. Nothing else. I don't understand why you're. You do not need to understand. You simply need to remember that the number exists. The SUV stopped at the main entrance of the Covington mansion. Carlo opened her door. The rain had finally slowed, tapering from a downpour to a drizzle, and the August heat was returning, reclaiming the night. She stepped out into that reclaimed warmth, and for just a moment, she turned back to look at the man in the dark suit sitting in the darkness of the vehicle's interior. "Thank you," she said. He did not respond. He simply watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes, and then Carlo closed the door, and the convoy pulled away into the night, leaving her standing alone in front of the mansion with a business card in her shaking hand and no idea whatsoever that this moment, this single moment of kindness from the most feared man in New York, had set in motion events that would transform all of their lives. She looked down at the business card. The rain had stopped completely now. In the distance, thunder rumbled like a warning that no one heard. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital burned white and endless, humming with a frequency that seemed to drill directly into Rowan's skull. She sat in the waiting room with her fingers laced so tightly together that her knuckles had turned the color of bone, watching the second hand of the wall clock move with impossible slowness. Tick. 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 Each sound was a small death, a countdown to something she could not prevent. Lily had collapsed during dinner at 6:19 in the evening. One moment the 5-year-old was asking for more pasta, her small voice bright and certain, and the next moment she was on the floor, her tiny body convulsing, her lips turning the color of storm clouds. Rowan had scooped her up, that impossibly light child who weighed barely more than a sack of flour, and driven like the world was ending because for Lily, it was. Now, sitting in this hospital waiting room with its chairs that smelled like industrial cleaner and human despair, Rowan waited for the cardiologist to tell her what she already knew in her bones. The sound of her own breathing filled the silence. In and out. In and out. Like a prayer that no one was listening to. The cardiologist's name was Dr. Mehta. He was a small man with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that had delivered too much bad news to hide it anymore. He came into the room still wearing his white coat, and before he even sat down, Rowan knew. She knew by the way his shoulders curved inward, by the way he could not quite make eye contact, by the heaviness that seemed to travel with him like a shadow that could not be erased. "Lily's condition has progressed faster than we anticipated," he said quietly. His voice was kind, which somehow made it worse. "The valve replacement cannot wait any longer. We need to schedule surgery. Ideally within the next 10 to 12 days. The words landed in her chest like stones dropped into dark water. Rowan felt her hands begin to shake. She pressed them flat against her thighs to keep them still. "What is the cost?" she heard herself ask. Her voice sounded strange, like it was coming from somewhere very far away. "The surgery itself, the hospital stay, the post-operative care, we're looking at approximately $47,000 to $50,000. That does not include any complications that might arise during the procedure." $47,000. Rowan Cole, who kept her checking account balance to the penny, who counted every grocery item before putting it on the conveyor belt, who had not bought new clothing since 2019, was being told that a child she loved with her entire being needed nearly $50,000 to live. She did not cry. Her hands simply stopped shaking because they had accepted a new terrible truth. "Your insurance covers approximately 20%, Dr. Mehta continued gently. "There are payment plans available. The hospital has financial assistance programs. I can connect you with a social worker who—" "I will figure it out," Rowan said. The words were a lie. She would not figure it out. There was no amount of figuring that could transform $78 into $47,000. There was no calculation that could change mathematics itself. Evelyn Blackwell arrived at the hospital at 8:15 in the evening, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop the moment she walked through the door. Lily's guardian was a woman of 64 with silver hair cut in a precise bob and wearing a cream-colored linen suit that probably cost more than Rowan's monthly salary. She moved through the hospital corridor like she owned it, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum with the sound of authority and old money. "Well," Evelyn said, settling herself into one of the uncomfortable chairs with visible disdain, "what is the verdict?" Dr. Mehta explained the situation again. The failing valve. The 12-day window. The cost that sat between Lily's life and her death like a wall made of concrete and indifference. Evelyn listened with her arms crossed over her chest, her face arranged in an expression of polite concern that did not reach her eyes. When the doctor finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice steady and ice-cold. "We have already spent a small fortune on specialists and treatments. Thousands and thousands of dollars on a child with a condition that was clearly never going to improve. At some point, one must accept reality." Rowan felt something inside her crystallize. Something hard and dangerous and desperate. "She is 5 years old," Rowan said quietly. "She draws pictures of rainbows. She is afraid of the dark. She calls me Vivi when she cannot pronounce my full name. She is not something to accept as a loss." Evelyn turned to look at her with an expression of such profound disdain that it seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. "You are the nanny," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement of hierarchy, a reminder of exactly who mattered in this equation and who did not. You do not get to have opinions about Lily's medical care. You also do not get to have opinions about family finances. If she dies, she dies. That is life, and life is cruel to those who cannot afford otherwise. She stood, her heels clicking again, and walked out of the hospital without looking back. Rowan sat alone in that terrible room for 3 more minutes. Then she went to Lily's room and held the child's small hand while the monitors beeped their mechanical rhythm, and she did what she had trained herself to do over 27 years of living in a world that offered no safety nets. She made a plan. Step 1, call her employer and ask for an emergency advance on her salary. Evelyn would refuse, but Rowan had to try. Step 2, sell everything she owned. Her grandmother's ring. Her car. The textbooks from the online classes she had been taking at night, trying to build a future. Step 3, find a second job. A third job. Work until her body gave out. Step 4, pray to a God she was not sure existed that it would be enough. What she did not do was call anyone who might help. Her mother had died when she was 16. Her father had never acknowledged her existence. She had no siblings, no aunts, no cousins who took phone calls. The only family she had was a 5-year-old child who called her Vivi and drew pictures of her holding hands with rainbows. It was nearly 11 in the evening when she left the hospital. The rain had started just as she was walking to her car, a 2004 Honda Civic that had been dying by degrees for the past 2 years. The transmission had been making a grinding sound for weeks. The check engine light had become a permanent feature on her dashboard, glowing like a tiny accusation. She drove back toward the Covington estate where she lived in a converted closet, trying not to think about the conversation with Evelyn, trying not to calculate how many shifts she would need to work to find $47,000 in the space between now and 12 days from now. The rain became harder. Then harder still. Within 20 minutes, it was coming down in sheets so thick that she could barely see 10 feet ahead of her car. The windshield wipers could not keep up. They beat against the glass like wings trying to escape a cage. She was 3 miles from the estate when the transmission made a sound like a scream. The car lurched. The engine smoked. And then, with a finality that felt almost merciful, the Honda Civic died completely, coasting to a stop on the shoulder of a flooded highway with water rising around the tires like the world was trying to swallow her whole. Rowan sat in the driver's seat of her dying car with her hand still gripping the steering wheel. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply sat there in the darkness with the rain hammering against the windows, and she understood with perfect clarity that the universe was not going to help her. The universe would not provide a miracle. The universe would only take until there was nothing left. She was still sitting there when the headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. Not one car but multiple sets of lights, moving in formation through the flooded darkness like a military convoy cutting through enemy territory. The lights grew closer. Closer still. A black SUV pulled to a stop directly in front of her disabled car. Then another. And another. 5 vehicles total, arranged with the kind of precise coordination that suggested this was not a random act of highway kindness. The center vehicle's door opened. The man who stepped out into the August rain was tall, easily 6 feet 2 inches or more, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway. He wore a black suit that was probably worth more than everything Rowan Cole owned, the fabric cut to fit his frame with tailored precision. His dark hair was slicked back from his face, which was sharp and angular, carved from stone. A thin scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone like a line drawn by someone who knew how to mark the world. Even in the darkness and the rain, she recognized him. Everyone in Connecticut recognized him. The stories about Dante Ferraro had a way of moving through the world like smoke. How he had built an empire on vengeance. How he had watched his father murdered when he was 16 years old and decided that very night that no one he loved would ever be unprotected again. How he ruled the underground of New York with an iron will and a code that was written in blood and loyalty. He walked to her car unhurried, each step deliberate, and bent to look through the window at her. His dark eyes, the color of storm clouds just before they break open, held no warmth and no threat. They simply held assessment. He was looking at her the way a general surveys a battlefield, understanding everything in a single glance. Rowan's heart was moving at impossible speed. She could feel her pulse in her throat, in her temples, in her fingertips. The man straightened. He was joined immediately by 2 other men, one tall and broad with a gold watch glinting on his wrist, the other with a scar across his neck. They moved with the kind of synchronization that spoke of years working together, years of understanding unspoken commands. The tall man, Carlo, she would later learn, opened her car door. The rain fell in harder, immediately soaking the interior of the Honda. "You need assistance," the man in the black suit said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like something that could not be broken. He was not asking a question. He was stating a fact that the universe would have to accommodate. Rowan should have said no. Every instinct she possessed, every survival mechanism that had kept her alive through abandonment and poverty and exploitation, screamed at her to refuse. This man was dangerous. The kind of dangerous that came with expensive suits and diplomatic immunity and the kind of power that made other people disappear. But in the back seat of her car, the child's car seat was visible. And on the dashboard, the hospital parking pass from St. Mary's was still sitting where she had left it. "My car died," she said. Her voice was barely audible over the rain. "I work nearby. I just need a ride." Dante Ferraro studied her for a moment that stretched into several moments. She could see him calculating something, processing information on a level that had nothing to do with a broken transmission and everything to do with the weight of decisions that could not be undone. "Get in," he said finally. Carlo opened the back door of the center SUV, and Rowan stumbled out of her dying car and into a vehicle that smelled like leather and expensive cologne and money in forms she could not comprehend. The interior was all dark leather and glass, with climate control that was so effective she immediately began to shiver. She was soaked through, her clothes clinging to her skin like a second layer of despair. She sat in the middle of the back seat. Dante Ferraro sat across from her, his dark eyes never leaving her face. 2 other men occupied the front seats, their attention on the road, their hands visible but positioned in ways that suggested training and readiness. "Your name," Dante said. "Rowan Cole." "Where do you work, Rowan Cole?" She hesitated. There was no world in which telling Dante Ferraro that she worked for the Covington family was a good decision. But there was also no world in which lying to him was a better one. "The Covington estate," she said quietly. "In Connecticut. I'm a live-in nanny." She watched something shift in his expression. His jaw tightened. A muscle worked in his cheek. When he spoke again, his voice was different, sharper, edged with something she could not identify. "The child. In your car seat." "Whose child?" "Lily. She is 5 years old." "She is," Rowan stopped. She had been about to say that Lily was dying, but she could not speak the words aloud. "She was at the hospital tonight." Dante turned to look out the window. The rain continued its assault on the vehicle, and in the darkness beyond the glass, the Connecticut landscape blurred into impressions of trees and road and water. The Covington family, he said slowly. Tell me about them. Rowan chose her words carefully. She explained that Evelyn Blackwell was Lily's guardian, a woman of considerable wealth and limited patience. She explained that Lily had a heart condition. She did not explain that Evelyn had essentially written her daughter off as a loss, that she viewed Lily's expensive medical needs as an inconvenience, that she had built a life that could accommodate almost any luxury except compassion. Dante listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. The SUV navigated the wet roads with perfect precision, the driver moving with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The surgery, Dante said finally. How much does it cost? Rowan felt her throat tighten. She did not want to say the number aloud. Saying it would make it real in a new way, would acknowledge that she was sitting in an expensive vehicle with the most feared man in New York asking her about financial nightmares. $47,000, she said. Possibly 50. Within the next 12 days, or... She did not finish the sentence. The SUV turned onto Blackwood Drive. The massive iron gates of the Covington estate came into view, those gates that marked the boundary between her world and the world she would never own. The vehicle slowed as it approached the security code box. Dante reached into the briefcase at his feet and withdrew a card. The cardstock felt expensive in Rowan's fingers, heavy, real, the kind of object that belonged to someone important. The letters were embossed in gold. Just a name and a phone number. Nothing else. If you ever need assistance, Dante said quietly, anything at all, you call this number. You do not call anyone else. You do not ask permission. You call this number. Do you understand? Rowan looked at the card. She looked at this man who had appeared out of nowhere on a flooded highway, who had taken her from her dying car into his expensive vehicle, who was now offering her something that felt like salvation wrapped in danger. I don't understand why you're... You do not need to understand, he interrupted. His voice was like venom, like a blade wrapped in ice. You simply need to remember that the number exists. The SUV stopped at the main entrance of the Covington mansion. Carlo opened her door. The rain had finally slowed, tapering from a downpour to a drizzle, and the August heat was returning, reclaiming the night like something alive and hungry. She stepped out into that reclaimed warmth, and for just a moment, she turned back to look at the man in the dark suit sitting in the darkness of the vehicle's interior. Thank you, she said. He did not respond. He simply watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes, and then Carlo closed the door, and the convoy pulled away into the night, leaving her standing alone in front of the mansion with a business card in her shaking hand. She looked down at the card. The rain had stopped completely now. In the distance, thunder rumbled like a warning that no one heard. Rowan slipped the card into her pocket next to her last $78, and she walked up the stone steps of a mansion she would never own, toward a future she could not afford, toward a choice that would transform everything. The humid August air hung thick enough to taste as Rowan pushed through the heavy oak doors of the restaurant, her legs moving like they belonged to someone else. The candlelit dining room sprawled before her in soft golds and shadows, waiters gliding between tables with practiced silence, and somewhere in the back, in the private booth she had memorized from 4 nights ago, Dante Ferraro was waiting. Her dress stuck to her skin. The navy sundress, the only nice thing she owned, clung to her ribs and spine. 3 years old, bought at a thrift store on her lunch break, and now it was all she had to look like someone worth taking seriously. Her hands shook as she walked past the main tables, past couples leaning close over wine glasses, past the soft clink of silverware on china. Every eye tracked her movement toward the back, toward the man who had paid her $200 bar tab without blinking, who had given her a business card like it was a key to a door she was not supposed to open. Dante sat in the shadows of his booth, Carlo and Pietro flanking him like carved stone. The moment he saw her, he gestured to the seat across from him. She Saturday. The leather was soft, expensive, worth more than her weekly salary. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were papers, medical records, hospital letterhead, surgical quotes. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Congenital heart defect, Dante said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. Tricuspid valve replacement. The standard cost is $200,000. But I know a surgeon, the best pediatric cardiac surgeon on the East Coast. He can do it for $47,000. Rowan stared at the numbers. 47,000. It might as well have been $1 million. It might as well have been the moon. That still, I can't. Her voice cracked like old paint. I have $78. 78. That's everything. I'll never raise that kind of money. Not in 9 days. The hospital moved up the surgery date. I'll pay it, Dante said. The words did not make sense. She stared at him, waiting for the catch, the price, the moment when this became something darker than kindness. Why, she whispered. Why would you help me? I kissed you on a dare. I'm nobody. I live in a closet. I work 14-hour days for a child who isn't even mine, and I have nothing to offer you except, she stopped, unable to finish. Dante leaned back. Candlelight carved shadows across his face, highlighting the scar that ran from his eye to his cheekbone, a permanent map of violence. When he spoke, his voice was different. Quieter. Like someone opening a door to a room he had kept locked for decades. My father was murdered when I was 16 years old. Rivals came to our house on a night like this, hot, humid, thunder in the air. They made me watch. Made me hide in a closet while they put 6 bullets into him in our kitchen. I stayed in that closet for 4 hours after they left, too afraid to move, too broken to scream. Carlo shifted his weight. In 15 years of working for Dante Ferraro, he had never heard him speak about his father. Pietro's jaw tightened. I built everything I have on that memory, Dante continued. On vengeance. On making sure no one ever had power over me again. I've had 1,000 people beg me for money. They crawled. They cried. They offered me things no human being should have to offer. He paused. His dark eyes fixed on her face. You didn't beg. You kissed me because you were desperate and brave and stupid enough to think it might matter. You told me the truth. That matters. Rowan's eyes filled with tears. She could not stop them. They spilled down her cheeks, and she did not have the strength to wipe them away. I can't accept this, she said. I can't pay you back. There's no way. I don't have anything. You don't have to pay me back, Dante said. His hand reached across the table. He did not touch her, but his palm lay open between them like an offering. But I want to meet her. Lily. I want to meet the child. 3 days later, Dante's black SUV pulled up the circular driveway of the Covington mansion at precisely 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The August heat had returned in full force, pressing down on everything like a physical weight. Rowan watched from the kitchen window as he stepped out, 6'1", shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit despite the heat. Carlo and Pietro flanked him as they walked to the front entrance. Evelyn Blackwell answered the door. She was 62 years old, silver hair pulled back so tight it stretched her skin, wearing pearls and a cream silk suit that screamed old money and older cruelty. Lily's grandmother by law only, guardian by obligation, a woman who had raised the child with the enthusiasm of someone caring for a burden. Mr. Ferraro, Evelyn said, her voice sharp as broken glass. Why are you here? I'm here to see the child, Dante replied. His voice did not change. It never changed. It was always the same, measured, patient, terrifying in its certainty. You have no business with this family, Evelyn said. But then Rowan appeared, her hand wrapped around Lily's small fingers, and the moment fractured into something new. Lily was 5 years old, small for her age, with dark curls and enormous brown eyes that held too much sadness for a child. She wore a pink princess dress, faded from the laundry, and carried a stuffed elephant with one ear half-chewed from nervous habit. When she saw Dante, she pressed against Rowan's legs, suddenly shy. Dante knelt down. He made himself smaller, less threatening, his broad shoulders curving forward until he was eye level with the child. "Hi, Lily," he said softly. "My name is Dante. I heard you like to draw." Lily peeked out from behind Rowan's thigh. Nodded. "I brought you something." He pulled out a pack of colored pencils, expensive ones, 100 colors in a wooden box that probably cost more than Rowan's monthly rent. Lily's eyes went enormous. She took the box carefully, as if it might break, then looked up at Rowan for permission. Rowan nodded. Her throat was tight. "What do you like to draw?" Dante asked. "My family," Lily said in her tiny, careful voice. "I draw my family." She said it while looking at Rowan. Not at Evelyn. Never at Evelyn. The words hung in the humid air like a blade. Evelyn's face flushed. Her hand gripped the doorframe so hard her knuckles went white, but she said nothing while Dante was present. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Over the next week, Dante came back 3 more times. He brought Lily books, stuffed animals, sat cross-legged on the floor of the nursery while she drew pictures with her new pencils. On the 4th visit, as the sun was setting and the August heat finally began to release its grip on the day, Lily climbed into his lap without asking. She fell asleep against his chest. Her small hand curled around his silk tie. Her breathing slowed and deepened. She was completely, utterly trusting. Carlo and Pietro exchanged glances from their position by the doorway. In 15 years of working for this man, in 15 years of watching him move through the world with the cold precision of a blade, they had never seen him like this. They had never seen him sit still with another human being. They had never seen him touch anything without its being business. But in the doorway, Rowan watched with tears streaming down her face. She watched Dante's hand rise slowly, carefully, and come to rest on Lily's small back. She watched him lower his head, breathing in the scent of the child's hair, something innocent and simple and completely at odds with everything he was. And in that moment, something shifted in the space between them. Something that had nothing to do with business or obligation or deals made in dark places. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away in a luxury apartment overlooking Central Park, Preston Mercer sat in the dark with his phone glowing in his hand. He had been watching the house. Tracking the visits. Documenting everything on his encrypted phone like evidence in a case he was building. Preston was 31 years old, handsome in the way that made people trust him too quickly, fit from expensive gym memberships, dressed in designer clothes bought with money that came from hedge funds and connections. He had connections everywhere. With corrupt cops who owed him favors. With judges who looked the other way. With people in dark places who understood that money could buy anything, including silence. He had been stalking Rowan Cole for 8 months. 8 months of showing up at her workplace. 8 months of messages she never answered. 8 months ago he had cornered her in a parking garage and put his hands around her throat and squeezed until the world went dark and she fell. 3 police reports. All ignored. Because Preston played golf with the precinct captain, and the precinct captain understood the rules of their world. But he had never imagined this. He had never imagined that she would end up with Dante Ferraro. The rage that built in his chest was the color of blood. It was the color of obsession, of ownership, of a man watching something he believed belonged to him being handled by someone else. His fingers curled into fists. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He began making phone calls. In the mansion, in the office adjacent to the master bedroom, Evelyn Blackwell made phone calls of her own. She called her society friends, women with names that appeared in the society pages and bank account numbers that had generational wealth built into them. She spread rumors with the precision of a woman who had spent her entire life perfecting the art of destruction disguised as gossip. She said things like, "I'm so worried about the child, and the nanny seems to have inappropriate attachments, and I'm documenting everything in case I need to involve protective services." She wanted Rowan gone. She wanted the nanny out of the house, out of Lily's life, before the child became too attached, before anyone questioned why Lily called Rowan Mama with such certainty, such love, such clarity. That night, After the house had gone quiet and the August darkness had settled like a weight over everything, Rowan stood on the terrace outside her tiny closet room, looking out at the sprawl of New York City beyond the mansion walls. The humidity had finally broken. A breeze moved across her skin, carrying the smell of rain that had not yet fallen. Dante appeared beside her without warning. He moved like that sometimes, silent, deliberate, as if the world bent to accommodate his presence. "The surgery is scheduled," he said. His voice was steady. "Certain. 6 days from now. $47,000. Already paid." Rowan broke. The sobs came from somewhere deep, somewhere she had not let anyone access in years. Her body shook with them. She could not stop them, could not control them, could not even speak through them. 6 years of working 14-hour days. 6 years of living in a closet. 6 years of watching Lily's health deteriorate while the bills piled up. All of it broke open at once. Dante's hand found hers. His thumb traced slow circles on her palm. "The surgery is paid for," he said again. "Lily will have what she needs. She will be healthy. She will survive." "Why?" Rowan whispered. "Why are you doing this? We're nobody." "You're not nobody," Dante said. His voice was different now. Rough with emotion that Carlo and Pietro had never heard before. "Lily drew me a picture yesterday. Do you want to know what it was?" He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. Opened it carefully. It was a crayon drawing. 3 figures holding hands. One labeled Rowan in purple letters. One labeled Lily in pink. One labeled Dante's in black. And across the top, in a 5-year-old shaky letters, family. "She drew me into her family," Dante said. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "No one has done that in 20 years. No one has looked at me and believed I could be part of something that simple, that pure, that good." Rowan looked at the drawing. Then she looked at this man, this dangerous man, this feared man, this man built on vengeance and darkness, holding a child's vision of family like it was the most precious thing he had ever owned. But what she did not know was what was happening in the city below. Preston Mercer was on the phone with people who understood violence. Evelyn Blackwell was reviewing photographs she had taken of Rowan and Lily together, building her case for intervention. And in the next 6 days, everything they had built, all the fragile hope, all the tentative family Lily had drawn, all the quiet certainty that love might actually be possible, was about to be tested in ways none of them could have imagined. The first threat would come at dawn. The second would be far more dangerous. The humid August night pressed down on the parking lot like a hand around her throat. Rowan's shift had ended at 11, the mansion's kitchen finally silent after a full day of preparing meals no one thanked her for a family that did not see her as human. She walked to her ancient sedan with her keys already in her trembling hand, the kind of exhaustion that made her bones feel hollow. That was when the shadow moved. Preston Mercer stepped out from between 2 parked cars, and the air itself seemed to freeze. He wore the same cologne he had worn when they lived together, when his fists came before his apologies, when love sounded like a threat. His eyes were burning with something worse than anger. "Possession. You think you can replace me?" His voice was a hiss, a snake's warning before the strike. "You think that criminal will protect you?" Rowan turned to run, but Preston was faster. His hand clamped around her arm, fingers digging in hard enough that she felt the bone beneath. She tried to pull away, but he spun her around and slammed her against the car. The metal was still warm from the day. His other hand wrapped around her throat, not squeezing yet, just a promise of what would come if she moved. "You're mine, Rowan," he whispered. "You've always been mine. Every job you take, every place you go, every second of every day, you belong to me." She could not breathe properly. Her vision tunneled. "I've been watching you," Preston continued, his mouth close to her ear. "Watching that criminal pretend to care about you. Watching you play house with his little girl like you're something more than what you are. Hired help. Garbage. But I remember what you were before, don't I? I remember every. Stop, Rowan gasped. Listen to me very carefully. His grip tightened. You're going to end this. Tomorrow. You're going to tell Dante Ferraro that you don't want his help. You're going to tell him to stay away from you. You're going to disappear, go back where you came from, and remember that nobody wants you. Rowan's mind spun. The surgery. Lily's surgery was in 3 days. Without Dante's help, without the $47,000 he had already promised, the surgery would not happen. Lily would die. That simple. That final. If you tell him, Preston continued, his voice dropping lower, more vicious, if you tell him about this conversation, if you do anything but exactly what I'm telling you to do, I'll make sure that little girl never makes it to the operating room. I have people in every hospital in this city. I can make a 5-year-old disappear so thoroughly that. Rowan screamed. The sound was pure animal, a force she did not know she still possessed. Preston jerked back, startled, and his grip loosened just enough. She wrenched her arm free, stumbled backward, and fell against the car door. Her throat burned. Her arm throbbed where his fingers had left marks like brands. Preston straightened his shirt, smoothed his hair. Smiled. You have until tomorrow, Rowan. Tell him to leave you alone or Lily's surgery gets cancelled. Your choice. He walked away, his footsteps measured and unhurried across the parking lot, disappearing into the darkness like a demon returning to hell. Rowan collapsed against her car, her whole body shaking so violently that she could not hold herself upright. She slid down the metal until she was sitting on the pavement, her hand pressed to her throat, gasping like a drowning woman who had been pulled from water only to be pushed back in. The next morning, sunlight fell across Evelyn Blackwell's mahogany desk like a judgment. Evelyn herself sat behind the desk with her hands folded, her white hair pulled back so tightly that it stretched her face into a mask. She was 73 years old and looked carved from marble, beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, cold and ageless and fundamentally inhuman. Rowan stood in front of the desk. She had known this was coming. She could feel it like weather moving in. I'm terminating your employment, effective immediately, Evelyn said. Her voice was courtroom sharp, every word a blade. You become far too attached to Lily. The boundaries between employee and family have become inappropriate. Concerning. I've documented several incidents of you overstepping your position, accepting gifts from questionable individuals, and exposing the child to dangerous elements. Rowan's heart stopped. Mrs. Blackwell, no. Please. Lily needs me. The surgery is in 3 days, and she's terrified, and I'm the only person who can. Lily is my responsibility, Evelyn snapped. Not yours. You're a nanny. Hired help. Nothing more than a series of tasks that could be completed by anyone with a pulse and a willingness to work for minimum wage. Your emotional investment in this child is inappropriate and frankly alarming. The words landed like punches. Everything Preston had said, everything Rowan had heard her entire life, crystallized into one moment of horrible clarity. She was nothing. Replaceable. A function. I have already called an agency, Evelyn continued, pulling a folder toward her on the desk. They will have a replacement here by the end of the week. You will pack your belongings and vacate the premises by 6 o'clock this evening. If you attempt to contact Lily after that point, I will file a restraining order with the court. If you attempt to contact me, I will call the police and inform them of your romantic involvement with a known criminal. I'm certain the NYPD would find that information very useful in any investigation they might choose to conduct. The converted closet where Rowan lived had held everything she owned. It took her 30 minutes to pack it all into 2 garbage bags and a cardboard box. As she carried them down the hallway toward the servants' staircase, she heard a sound that shattered something in her chest. Lily's screams. The child had seen her through one of the hallway windows, had recognized the packed bags, had understood with the terrible clarity of children that her world was ending. She pressed her hands against the glass, her mouth open, tears pouring down her face. Mama. Mama, don't leave me. Mama. Over and over, that word. Mama. Not nanny. Not helper. Mama. Rowan nearly dropped the boxes. She turned toward the window, but one of Evelyn's staff members, cold-eyed and obedient, was already pulling Lily away. The child's screams echoed through the hallway, down the stairs, following Rowan out into the August afternoon. She sat on a bench in Central Park as the sky darkened. The humidity had finally broken, and rain began to fall in sheets, soaking through her clothes within minutes. She had $83 in her pocket now. $83, 2 garbage bags, and nowhere to sleep. Preston's threat echoed in her mind, "I'll make sure that little girl never makes it to the operating room." Evelyn's words, "You're nothing. Hired help. Replaceable." Rowan pulled out her phone with shaking hands. In her contacts was a name she had not thought she would ever call. Dante Ferraro. She stared at it. What would she say? That she was a disaster? That everyone she touched was destroyed? That maybe Preston was right and she should just disappear? The rain came harder. She was shivering, from cold, from fear, from the weight of everything crashing down at once. Then she saw it. A notification. A photo someone had tagged her in from 3 days ago at the hospital. The photo was of Lily holding her drawing, the one she had given Dante. 3 figures holding hands. Across the top in careful letters, family. That single word stopped the spiraling. Rowan's finger pressed the call button. Dante answered on the first ring. There was no greeting, no question about the hour or the storm. He simply waited for her to speak. "I need help," she whispered. "Where are you?" His voice was ground glass and certainty. 40 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up to the park bench. Dante emerged without a coat, without hesitation, walking directly through the rain to where Rowan sat shivering and soaked. He did not say anything. He removed his suit jacket and draped it across her shoulders, the warmth of it immediate and impossible, and guided her toward the car with one hand on her back. Carlo was driving. Pietro sat in the passenger seat. Neither man turned around as Rowan climbed into the back beside Dante, both of them knowing that something had changed, that whatever quiet boundary had existed was gone now. "Tell me," Dante said. So she did. Everything. Preston's hands around her throat. His threats about the surgery, about Lily. Evelyn's termination, the coldness of it, the finality. Lily's screams. Dante's face did not change. His expression remained utterly still, utterly calm. But Carlo and Pietro exchanged a look that both men had learned years ago meant someone's life was about to end. "Where is Preston Mercer?" Dante asked, his voice deadly and quiet. "Probably his apartment," Rowan said. "Tribeca. He told me he'd be waiting for my answer tomorrow morning." Dante made 3 phone calls. He did not explain who he was calling or why. He simply spoke names and numbers and specific information, and listened to responses that Rowan could not hear. When he finished, he turned to her. "You're staying with me until this is handled. Lily's surgery happens in 3 days, no matter what. And Preston Mercer is about to learn what it costs to threaten someone under my protection." At 3 in the morning, 12 men in tactical gear moved through Preston Mercer's apartment building like ghosts. But they were not Dante's men. They were FBI. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Because what Preston did not know was that his corrupt cop friends, the ones he paid, the ones who erased reports and looked away from evidence, had been under federal investigation for 6 months, and Dante Ferraro, who had information on half the dirty cops in New York and the intelligence to leverage it properly, had made a single call to a federal prosecutor who owed him exactly one favor. The battering ram hit Preston's door at 3:47. The impact jerked him awake, his body coming upright in darkness before his mind even registered what was happening. Flashlights flooded the bedroom, so bright that he had to shield his eyes. "FBI! Hands where we can see them! Now!" Preston scrambled out of bed, trembling like a cornered animal, his hands raised. What is this? This is a mistake. I didn't do anything. I didn't. They found everything. The recordings of his threats to Rowan, made on burner phones he thought were untraceable. The photographs he had taken of her. The messages to his cop friends asking for favors. The evidence of every assault, every manipulation, every moment of control packaged and catalogued and irrefutable. Preston Mercer, you are under arrest for stalking, assault, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to commit bribery. They dragged him out of his apartment in handcuffs at dawn, naked and shaking and screaming. Every news camera in New York was waiting outside because Dante had made sure they knew exactly when to arrive. Within minutes, Preston's face was on every local news broadcast. By noon, it was national. By the next morning, his mugshot was everywhere. Evelyn Blackwell, meanwhile, received 3 phone calls. The first was from the New York State Division of Child and Family Services, informing her that they had received detailed reports of emotional abuse and neglect of a minor in her care, and that they would be conducting a home visit within 48 hours. The second was from the hospital board of directors, requesting her resignation due to evidence that she had deliberately withheld funding and authorization for necessary medical treatment of a child in her custody, which constituted gross negligence and potentially criminal behavior. The third was from every society columnist in New York, each receiving documentation of Evelyn's treatment of Rowan, her cruelty disguised as discipline, her coldness framed as propriety. Her systematic destruction began in the pages of the society columns and spiraled outward from there. Her phone rang all morning. She did not answer it. The women who had lunched with her for 30 years stopped returning her calls. The charity she had donated to suddenly found other benefactors. The exclusive clubs where she had spent 50 years building her reputation quietly informed her that her membership was no longer welcome. By afternoon, Dante's lawyers had filed emergency custody papers. Temporary guardianship of Lily Blackwell was transferred to Rowan Cole, with Dante listed as financial sponsor and legal backup. Evelyn's custody was suspended pending investigation. 2 days later, in family court, the judge reviewed the evidence. Evelyn's documented neglect. Preston's arrest and the charges he faced. Lily's own testimony, given carefully and gently by a child psychologist, that she wanted to be with Rowan, that Rowan was her mama. The judge looked at Dante sitting in the courtroom in a dark suit, sitting beside Rowan, and made his decision. Temporary custody is granted to Rowan Cole, effective immediately. The court will reconvene in 30 days to determine permanent arrangements. Evelyn stood up screaming. Security had to physically escort her from the courtroom, her dignity shattered as completely as Lily's had been when Rowan left. Preston faced 40 years. His trial was 6 months away, but his lawyer had already told him to take a plea deal. Every corrupt cop he had paid was suspended pending investigation. His entire network had collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. And in the hallway outside the courtroom, Lily ran toward Rowan and threw her arms around the woman's neck with the force of absolute certainty. "You came back," Lily said. "You came back to me." Rowan held her, trembling, and finally let herself cry. The surgical waiting room at St. Mary's Hospital smelled like antiseptic and desperation. Rowan sat in a mold plastic chair, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white, bloodless, like the rest of her. Beside her, Dante occupied a leather chair. He had requested one, because he would not sit like an ordinary person waiting for news, his dark suit immaculate, his face carved from stone. Only his fingers betrayed him. They drummed once against his thigh, then stopped. Once. That was all he allowed himself. Carlo and Pietro stood near the entrance, positioned so they could watch everyone who entered the waiting room. They had learned long ago not to ask questions when Dante said a place mattered. They simply appeared and held the perimeter. The clock on the wall read 8:56 in the morning. Lily had been in surgery for exactly 2 hours and 13 minutes. "Dr. Reeves is the best," Rowan whispered. Her voice trembled like a candle in the wind. "You said so. You called in the favor. He's the best on the entire East Coast." He is, Dante said quietly. His voice was steady, but Rowan heard the tremor underneath it, buried so deep that only she would recognize it. The surgery will be successful. You can't know that. I can. He reached over and took her hand, unclasped it from its desperate grip, and held it. The warmth of his palm against hers was real. Solid. Present. Because I decided it would be. Because I have spent the last 40 hours making sure that nothing gets in the way of that child walking out of this hospital alive. Carlo exchanged a look with Pietro. In 15 years of working for Dante Ferraro, they had never heard him speak like this. Never heard certainty masquerade as prayer. The clock moved. 9:15, 10:30. 12:45, the waiting room filled with the sound of other families, other vigils. A woman 3 chairs down was crying quietly into a rosary. A man kept checking his phone as if the surgery might text him updates. Rowan sat in absolute stillness, her hand in Dante's, and counted the seconds like a drowning woman counts gasps for air. At 2:07 p.m., Dr. Reeves pushed through the double doors. He was tall, grey-haired, wearing surgical scrubs that had been changed but still bore the faint stains of the morning's work. His mask hung around his neck. When he saw Rowan and Dante, he smiled. Rowan stood so quickly her chair clattered backward. The valve replacement was successful, Dr. Reeves said. His voice was warm, professional, carrying the confidence of a man who had performed this surgery 1,000 times before. Lily is stable. Her heart is functioning beautifully. We've got her in pediatric ICU for monitoring, but I'm confident we're looking at a full recovery. Rowan made a sound like something breaking. Like all the fear and hope and desperation she had been holding for the past 2 weeks finally had permission to escape. She collapsed forward, and Dante caught her. He held her while she sobbed against his chest, his hand pressed against the back of her head, his own eyes closed. She's alive, Rowan gasped. She's alive. She's alive. She is alive, Dante confirmed, and Carlo and Pietro both saw the moisture at the corner of the boss's eyes, which meant they would never speak of this moment to anyone, ever, for the rest of their natural lives. For days later, the hospital released Lily with instructions about activity restrictions, medication schedules, and follow-up appointments. The pediatric cardiologist had cleared her for the penthouse. No stairs more than once a day. No running for 6 weeks. But alive. Every instruction came with the glorious subtext of alive. Dante carried her to the black SUV parked outside the hospital entrance, Rowan beside them with a bag containing discharge paperwork and a small stuffed bear the nurses had given Lily. The September morning was cool, almost autumn, and the humidity that had strangled New York all summer had finally broken. When they reached the penthouse, Lily's eyes went wide. The entire space had been redecorated in the past week. The master bedroom had been transformed into a princess sanctuary, lavender walls painted with soft clouds, a canopy bed with gauzy curtains, shelves full of books and toys, a small desk where she could draw. Rowan's throat tightened. This was not a temporary space. This was a declaration. Is this for me? Lily whispered. Dante knelt down to her level, careful of her still healing chest. This is your home, he said. For as long as you want it to be. Lily threw her arms around his neck, mindful of not pressing against her chest incision, and Dante held her like she was made of crystal that might shatter. Over her shoulder, his eyes met Rowan's. Something passed between them in that moment, understanding, gratitude, the beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. Recognition, perhaps. The understanding that 3 separate people had somehow become a unit, and that unit was unbreakable. That night, after Lily was asleep in her new bed with the canopy curtains drawn like a fortress around her, Rowan and Dante stood on the penthouse balcony. 30 stories above the city, with the lights of Manhattan spread below them like fallen stars. The September wind was gentle, carrying the smell of rain from somewhere distant. I don't understand, Rowan said quietly. Her voice was steadier now, but still held the thickness of exhaustion. Why you did this? The surgery. The custody battle. Destroying Preston and Evelyn. You didn't have to. You didn't owe us anything. Dante was quiet for a long moment. The city hummed beneath them. Sirens in the distance. The sound of 1,000 lives continuing, unaware that 3 of those lives had just been saved. I watched my father die when I was 16, he said finally. His voice was like something heavy settling into place. I held him while he bled out on a warehouse floor because he had made an enemy of the wrong man. I built everything I have on rage and vengeance. Made myself into someone people fear because I never wanted to be powerless again. Never wanted to watch someone I loved die and be unable to stop it. He turned to face her. In the city light, his scar caught the glow, a thin silver line from eye to cheekbone. A permanent reminder of his own journey through violence. Then a woman walks into my restaurant on a dare, he continued. Kisses me in front of my entire empire like she doesn't care that I'm the most feared man in New York. And she tells me the truth about her life. No lies. No pretense. Just the raw, honest truth about a woman with $78 in her pocket who loves a child so much she was willing to sacrifice everything. He reached for her hand. Then that 5-year-old draws me into her family picture like I belong there. Like I'm not the monster everyone thinks I am. Like I'm just the man. Someone worth saving. You are, Rowan whispered. I wasn't, Dante said. Not until you and Lily showed me that I could be. You two are the first people in 20 years who looked at me and saw something worth saving instead of something to fear. So I saved you back. Not because I owed you anything. Because you made me realize that the strongest thing I could do wasn't vengeance. It was opening my heart to 2 people who saw past the darkness to the man underneath. Rowan's eyes filled with tears. I'm falling in love with you, she said. The words came out shaky, uncertain, like a confession that might be rejected. Is that allowed? Can the nanny fall in love with the mafia boss who paid for her daughter's heart surgery? Dante cupped her face in his scarred hands. When he touched her like she was precious. Like she was something he had been terrified of losing. Every single day, he said, I wake up grateful that you're still here. That Lily is still here. That you both chose me. He kissed her. Not like the first kiss in the restaurant, not dared, not desperate, not a show for anyone else. This kiss was certain. This kiss was choice. This kiss was a man who had spent 20 years behind walls of ice, finally allowing himself to feel the warmth of another person. When they pulled apart, Rowan rested her forehead against his. Below them, the city continued its endless rhythm. Somewhere in those streets, Preston Mercer was in a cell awaiting trial, facing 40 years. Somewhere across town, Evelyn Blackwell was packing boxes, selling off properties, losing the social standing she had built her entire identity around. Justice had come not as death or vengeance, but as systematic destruction. The kind that left them alive to understand what they had lost. But in the penthouse, in the cool September air, there was only peace. There was only a man and a woman and the knowledge that sometimes love is the most dangerous and most powerful force of all. 6 months later, the penthouse on a Sunday morning looked like an ordinary home, which was perhaps the greatest miracle of all. Lily, now 6 years old, fully recovered from surgery, her scar already fading to a thin line, sat at the kitchen table with a box of colored pencils and a fresh sheet of white paper. Her pigtails bounced as she drew with the complete concentration only children possess. Rowan stood at the stove making pancakes, wearing one of Dante's dress shirts over her clothes, her hair twisted into a messy bun. The kitchen smelled like butter and cinnamon and life. She was humming something, a song Lily had learned in kindergarten. She looked more at peace than she ever had in her entire life. Dante walked in from his study, picked Lily up and spun her around, making her giggle with the pure, uncomplicated joy of a child who knows she is loved. He set her down carefully, mindful of her still healing scar, and kissed the top of her head. Carlo and Pietro stood awkwardly in the doorway holding a birthday cake because Lily's birthday party was this afternoon and they had somehow been roped into helping set up decorations. This was not what Dante Ferraro's life was supposed to look like. He was supposed to be alone, feared, untouchable. Instead, he was helping a 6-year-old blow up balloons and letting her paint his nails sparkly purple because she had asked and he had said yes without hesitation. Rowan walked over and kissed him, whispered against his lips, "Thank you for choosing us." Dante pulled her close. Every single day. Lily held up her newest drawing. 3 figures holding hands in the center. 2 more standing behind them, Carlo and Pietro drawn with exaggerated muscles and sunglasses. Across the top in careful letters, the word family. But this time there was another word beneath it, written in letters the color of sunrise, forever. Every day we choose between fear and trust, between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. Rowan thought she was nobody, a nanny with $78, living in a closet, pouring everything into a child who wasn't hers. She was invisible, powerless, heading toward a future of nothing. Then she kissed the most feared man in New York on a dare, and everything changed. Not because he saved her, though he did. Not because he paid for a $47,000 surgery that gave a little girl her life back, though he did that too. But because a 5-year-old drew him into her family and he looked at that crayon picture and decided that some debts are paid in blood, and others are paid in protection, in loyalty, in choosing someone completely. Preston Mercer got 40 years in federal prison. Federal agents led him out in handcuffs on every news channel, and he will never threaten anyone again. Evelyn Blackwell lost everything. Her reputation. Her custody. Her place in society. Destroyed systematically and publicly until she was nothing but a cautionary tale whispered at country clubs. But the real justice was not their punishment. It was Lily's recovery. It was Rowan learning that she was never, ever nobody. It was Dante discovering that the strongest thing he could do was not vengeance, it was opening his heart. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to be saved, and it's never too late to save someone else. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about the moment everything changes. Comment below, have you ever taken a risk that changed your entire life? We read every single comment. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing that even in the darkest places, love can find a way. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.